It was a cold, eerie night when I first heard the story of Devil's Peak. The air was thick with the kind of tension that only a night in the woods could bring. We were deep in the Virginia wilderness, far away from the buzz of city lights and the noise of the modern world. The only sound that could be heard was the crackling of the campfire and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. It felt as though the trees themselves were alive, watching, waiting. And as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, just beyond the reach of the firelight. There were 5 of us gathered around the fire, a group of friends who had decided to take a weekend trip into the woods to escape the chaos of everyday life. We had been planning the trip for weeks, and when the weekend finally arrived, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to disconnect and enjoy the silence of nature. But that silence, it was a different kind of silence, one that felt too heavy, too knowing. The deeper we ventured into the woods, the more oppressive the quiet became. We sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories, trying to ignore the uncomfortable stillness in the air. Everyone seemed to be on edge, but we did our best to pretend it wasn't bothering us. The darkness surrounding us felt endless, as if the woods themselves were closing in. And yet, none of us spoke about it. No one dared to acknowledge the strange atmosphere. Mark, one of my oldest friends, had grown up in Virginia. He had spent more time in these woods than any of us. His family owned a cabin not far from here, and every summer he would come up to visit, roaming the forests and fishing in the nearby rivers. We all knew Mark as the brave one, the guy who would climb the highest trees or venture into places that gave the rest of us chills. But tonight, something was different about him. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by something else, something more subdued. He sat closest to the fire, the flames flickering against his face, casting long shadows on the trees behind him. His eyes were fixed on the fire, not really looking at any of us, as if lost in thought. It wasn't until the air grew even colder that Mark finally broke the silence. "Ever heard of Devil's Peak?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed to hang in the air, a strange weight to them that immediately caught my attention. We all shook our heads, glancing at one another. None of us had ever heard of Devil's Peak, and honestly, we weren't sure if we wanted to. The name alone sounded ominous, like something straight out of a horror story. But Mark's face was unreadable, his expression serious as he leaned forward slightly, as though preparing to tell us something important. Mark's eyes widened, the firelight dancing in them. "It's a place no one talks about," he continued, his voice low and urgent, Locals call it cursed. I don't know if it's just an urban legend or something more, but people who've gone up there never come back. A chill ran down my spine at the sound of those words. It wasn't like Mark to tell ghost stories, and it certainly wasn't like him to speak in such a serious tone. We all chuckled nervously, trying to shake off the tension. Surely, it was just one of those ridiculous rumors, the kind that every small town has. People love to tell spooky stories about places they didn't understand. Devil's Peak sounded like something made up to frighten outsiders. Come on, man, that's just some local superstition, right? I said, forcing a laugh. But even as the words left my mouth, I could feel the weight of the conversation pressing on me. The forest around us felt heavier somehow, as if the trees themselves were listening, waiting for Mark to speak again. Mark didn't laugh. His gaze was fixed on the flames, his jaw clenched tightly. "No," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's real. I've heard stories from people who've lived here their whole lives. People who've gone up to Devil's Peak. They don't come back. And if they do, they're never the same." He paused, taking a slow breath. "There's something about that place. Something that changes you." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. The only sound, the occasional rustling of the wind in the trees. We all stared at Mark, unsure of how to respond. None of us were sure if we should laugh it off or take him seriously. But the way he spoke, so earnestly, so fearful, made us hesitate. Something about his words didn't feel like a joke. There was no hint of amusement in his eyes, no playful tone in his voice. This wasn't the Mark we knew. "Are you messing with us?" someone asked, breaking the tension. Mark shook his head slowly. "I wish I was. But I've seen things, heard things, things that I can't explain. Devil's Peak is cursed. There are stories from the old settlers about people who disappeared, about strange happenings in the woods. It's not just an urban legend. It's something real." A thick silence fell over the group. I could see that the others were as uneasy as I was. We had all heard the usual campfire stories, the ones about haunted houses and ghostly apparitions. But there was something different about this one. Mark's fear was palpable. It was the kind of fear that made you question everything you thought you knew. "I'm serious," Mark continued, his voice more insistent now. "They say if you go up to the peak at night, you'll hear voices in the wind. Whispers, like people calling your name." I felt a shiver run down my spine as the wind picked up, making the trees sway and creak. It was as though the forest itself was reacting to Mark's words. The air seemed colder, thicker, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. "Do you think it's just some ghost story?" I asked, my voice trembling more than I wanted it to. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, but I immediately regretted asking. Mark's face remained grim, and he didn't respond immediately. No one talks about it. People who've gone up there, they're never the same. Some come back with their minds broken. Others... He trailed off, not finishing the sentence. It wasn't necessary. We all understood what he was implying. The fire crackled again, louder now, almost as if it were trying to drown out the heavy silence. My heart was pounding in my chest. Something about this place, about Devil's Peak, was different from anything I had ever heard. Mark wasn't just telling a story. He wasn't trying to spook us for fun. This was something real to him. We all sat there for a long while, each of us processing what Mark had said. The sounds of the forest around us seemed to grow louder, the rustling of leaves now more ominous, as though the woods were alive with whispers of their own. There was something deeply unsettling in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. And for the first time that night, we all understood. Devil's Peak wasn't just another spooky story. It was a place of real danger, something that no one dared to speak of, yet everyone feared. Mark's story had planted a seed in all of us, and as the night went on, none of us could escape the feeling that we were not alone in the woods. The next day, my mind couldn't shake the images Mark had planted in it the night before. I had tried to push it out, tried to laugh it off as just another campfire story. But there was something about the way Mark spoke, something about the fear in his eyes that kept me awake long after the fire had gone out. The quiet of the woods outside the cabin, the wind whispering through the trees, felt like a reminder of that ominous tale. Curiosity got the best of me. I couldn't stop thinking about Devil's Peak. What was it about that place that made it so feared? Was it just an old legend, or was there something darker at work? I found myself walking toward the cabin's old desk, pulling out my laptop and connecting to the weak Wi-Fi signal we had in the area. I opened up Google and typed the words Devil's Peak, Virginia, into the search bar, hoping to find some answers. The first few results were like I expected. Old websites, scattered rumors, and dark web forums where people shared ghost stories and conspiracy theories. But as I scrolled through them, I found something that made my pulse quicken. A brief mention of strange disappearances, blood rituals, and an abandoned town. My stomach tightened. This wasn't the usual ghost story. There was something more to it. I clicked on the link, eager to learn more. The article led me to an obscure news site with an article from the 1800s, dated long before the internet age, when the town of Virginia was just beginning to settle. The title read, "Horrific Massacre Near Devil's Peak. Unsolved Mystery Still Haunts the Area." The article itself was brief, but what it described sent a cold chill down my spine. It spoke of a family, a husband, wife, and their 3 children, who had lived near the foot of Devil's Peak. They had been found slaughtered in their home, their bodies torn apart, lying in a pool of their own blood. The horror of it was unimaginable, and yet no one knew who or what had done it. There were no signs of forced entry, no traces of weapons, or any obvious motive. Some of the neighbors had heard strange noises coming from the house the night before the massacre, growls, the sound of heavy breathing, even whispers in the wind. But when the authorities arrived, all they found were the mutilated bodies. The official investigation concluded that the family had been killed by some wild animal, perhaps a bear, a wolf, or a mountain lion. But that didn't sit right with me. The wounds didn't match any known animal attack, and the way the bodies were positioned, almost like they were placed deliberately, raised more questions than answers. The family's home was eventually abandoned, left to rot, with no one ever daring to live there again. As I read further, I found that there were more accounts of strange happenings around the area, including more disappearances in the years that followed. People had gone missing, hikers, travelers, even locals, and there were whispers of shadowy figures seen on the trails leading up to the peak. Some said it was just superstition, but others swore that the place was cursed, that the land itself was hungry for blood. Then, as I scrolled to the bottom of the article, something caught my eye, a brief note about a graveyard. The article mentioned that after the massacre, the family was buried in an unmarked grave, their resting place unknown. But the most disturbing part was that the town, once vibrant and full of life, had been completely abandoned shortly after the massacre. No one could explain why the entire settlement disappeared, why its inhabitants had fled in the dead of night, never to return. The land had been left untouched for decades, growing wild and untamed, like something had driven the people away, something they were too afraid to face. I sat back, my heart pounding in my chest. The story was starting to make sense now. Mark had been right. Devil's Peak wasn't just a location on a map. It was a cursed piece of land, haunted by bloodshed and horror. And the massacre? It wasn't just a tragic event. It was the beginning of something much darker, a darkness that had settled over the area and refused to leave. I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. I needed to know more. The next search result led me to a local history site, where I found mention of the town's disappearance. The site described how, in the early 1900s, strange occurrences began to plague the town. People reported hearing ghostly voices in the woods, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, like something was trying to communicate with them. There were rumors of rituals, blood sacrifices, strange symbols carved into the trees, and an ancient cult that had once called the area home. The people of the town had lived in fear of what was happening around them. And then, one night, they simply left. Without a word, without a trace. The site claimed that the local government had tried to reopen investigations into the disappearances, but it was too late. The town was gone. No one knew who the people had been running from or why they had fled. But the stories, the rumors, the legends, they all pointed to one place: Devil's Peak. I felt my stomach twist as I realized that the more I uncovered, the deeper the mystery became. The bloodshed, the disappearances, the whispers in the woods. It wasn't just a series of tragic events. It was as if something had been awakened. Something dark. Something that had been lying dormant for years, waiting for the right time to strike again. And as I sat there in the dim light of the cabin, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something much larger, something much more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Devil's Peak was no longer just a story to me. It was real. It was a place soaked in blood, in horror, and in death. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, trying to process everything I had just learned. My mind raced, turning over every detail, every chilling piece of the puzzle. Mark had been right. There was something in those woods, something ancient and malevolent, waiting for the next person to wander too close. And I realized, with a sickening feeling in my gut, that I had just stepped into the middle of it all. The silence in the cabin felt deafening, and I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching me. Just beyond the windows, the whispers of the past seemed to creep into the present, wrapping themselves around my thoughts, pulling me deeper into the mystery of Devil's Peak. I had no idea where this journey would take me, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be able to forget about it. Not now. Not ever. The land had tasted blood once, and it was hungry again. A couple of weeks later, I found myself in the driver's seat of my old car, heading back toward Devil's Peak with a group of friends. We had all talked about it for days after Mark's chilling story, and somehow, despite the unease that still lingered in the back of my mind, the idea of exploring the place became too tempting to resist. The more we discussed it, the more it felt like we had to go see it for ourselves. to unravel whatever dark mystery surrounded that cursed mountain. We had to know. The drive was long, the winding roads stretching endlessly through the dense woods of Virginia. As we made our way through the small town that lay before the peak, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The town seemed empty, too empty. The houses were dilapidated, windows broken or boarded up, and there wasn't a single soul in sight. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie, abandoned and forgotten by time. No one had lived here in years, yet the place felt strangely alive. The silence was thick, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. We drove through the town quickly, trying not to stare too long at the abandoned streets and empty houses. There was a heaviness in the air that felt suffocating, and the closer we got to the foot of Devil's Peak, the more it seemed like we were driving deeper into something we shouldn't be messing with. When we finally reached the foot of the mountain, I parked the car. The trees around us were massive, towering above like silent giants. The mountain loomed in the distance, shrouded in mist, its peak barely visible against the overcast sky. Mark, who had been unusually quiet during the drive, turned to us as we all got out of the car. "If you feel something weird," he said, his voice barely audible, "don't ignore it. Just leave. I'm serious." We all nodded, trying to laugh off the tension that had settled over the group. Mark had been a little on edge ever since we started the drive, and we knew it wasn't just the hike that was making him nervous. The stories he'd shared around the campfire a couple of weeks ago seemed to have followed him here, and now it felt like they were pulling us deeper into something that might be better left untouched. As we began our hike, the air grew colder. The dense forest quickly surrounded us, the trees pressing in close, casting long shadows over the trail. The crunch of our boots on the dry leaves was the only sound that broke the eerie silence. And the further we hiked, the more it felt like we were being swallowed whole by the woods. There were no birds, no rustling animals, no sounds of nature at all. Just the heavy silence that seemed to hang in the air, as if even the forest was holding its breath. The weight of it settled on me like a thick fog, and the further we went, the more I started to feel like we were being watched. My thoughts kept drifting back to the stories Mark had told, the warnings he'd given. I tried to shake it off, to ignore the growing discomfort in the pit of my stomach, but I couldn't help it. Every step felt heavier than the last. We hiked for hours, the landscape around us growing wilder, more untamed. The further we went, the more isolated we became. The trees seemed to close in tighter, blocking out the light, casting the trail in shadow. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following us. But there was nothing. Just the quiet and the trees and the feeling that we were not alone. That's when we saw it. Up ahead, on the edge of a cliff, we saw a figure standing completely still, staring into the abyss below. It was a person, a silhouette against the cloudy sky, unmoving. My heart skipped a beat. The figure looked almost out of place, like something from another time. I couldn't make out any details, but the sight of them standing there, alone and motionless, sent a shiver down my spine. I wasn't sure if it was a person or just some trick of the light, but something about it felt wrong. "Hey," I called out, my voice cracking a little in the silence. "Are you okay?" There was no response. The figure didn't even flinch. They just stood there, completely still, as if they hadn't heard me. I felt a wave of unease wash over me, and I glanced around at my friends. We were all staring at the figure, uncertain of what to do. Should we approach? Should we call out again? I took a step forward, compelled by some strange impulse to get closer. The figure was so still, so motionless, that I couldn't help but feel that there was something not quite right about it. But just as I moved, a sudden wave of dread. It was a feeling, an overwhelming sense that something was watching me, something I couldn't see, but I could feel it. My breath caught in my throat, and my feet seemed to be glued to the ground. I turned back to my friends, hoping they would say something, but they were just as frozen as I was. We all stood there, staring at the figure in silence. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. One moment, the figure was there, standing at the edge of the cliff, and the next moment, it vanished, just disappeared. There were no sounds, no movement, just the eerie stillness of the woods. I turned around again, checking every corner of the surrounding trees, but there was nothing. The figure was gone. It was like it had never been there at all. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice shaking. My friends all nodded, their faces pale. No one said anything for a long while. We all felt it, the unease, the creeping sense that something was wrong. But none of us had the courage to ask what it was. We were too scared to voice the fear that had settled deep in our bones. Without another word, we started to head back down the trail, our pace quickening. The air felt heavier with every step, as though the very forest was trying to hold us there. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their gnarled branches stretching toward us like long fingers, desperate to stop us from leaving. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still watching us from the shadows. By the time we reached the car, we were all silent, too shaken to speak. Mark's warning echoed in my mind. if you feel something weird, don't ignore it. Just leave. We should have listened. The strange figure. The unexplainable disappearance. It all felt like a warning. One that we had ignored. That night, we all went to bed early. None of us spoke about what had happened. The silence was too thick, too heavy to break. But that night, we all shared the same nightmare. We were back in the woods, walking through the trees, the air cold and oppressive. We could hear the whispering wind, but it wasn't just the wind. It was something else, something darker. And then we saw it, the figure, standing in the woods, covered in blood. It reached out to us, its hand gnarled and twisted, its face unrecognizable. Its eyes were empty, hollow, and as it reached for us, we could feel its cold touch, like ice crawling across our skin. We woke up at the same time, all of us gasping for air, drenched in sweat, and for the rest of the night, no one dared to speak a word. We all knew, whatever was out there, in the woods, in the darkness of Devil's Peak, wasn't just a story. It was real, and it was waiting. Weeks passed after our disturbing experience at Devil's Peak, but the nightmare didn't fade. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see the shadowy figure standing at the cliff, motionless, and then vanishing without a trace. It felt like something from that place had followed me back, lingering in the back of my mind. The unease, the feeling of being watched, it wouldn't go away. It had become a part of me, creeping into my every thought, every moment. I tried to brush it off, to convince myself it was just the woods playing tricks on me, but I couldn't ignore it. Something about that place, something ancient, something malevolent, had a hold on me. The more I tried to forget, the more I found myself drawn back to it. I needed to know more, to understand what had happened up there, to uncover the secrets that seemed to hide in the shadows of Devil's Peak. So, I began asking around. I spoke to locals, people who had lived in the area for years, hoping to uncover more about the strange happenings. I visited the town's small diner, hoping to strike up a conversation with anyone who might know something. But it wasn't easy. Whenever I brought up Devil's Peak, the room would fall silent. People would glance around, as if they were afraid of being overheard, before quickly changing the subject. It was clear that the mountain wasn't something anyone wanted to talk about. But I wasn't going to give up that easily. I knew there was something more, something hidden just beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. So I turned to the library. It was old and dusty, with shelves lined with books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. I spent hours there, going through old records, searching for anything that might explain the strange occurrences around Devil's Peak. And then, one day, I found it. I had almost given up, my eyes aching from hours of reading, when something caught my attention. It was an old, leather-bound book, tucked away in the farthest corner of the library. The cover was worn and faded, but something about it felt important, like it held the answers I had been searching for. I pulled it from the shelf and blew off the dust. The pages inside were yellowed with age, and the ink had faded in some places, but the words were still legible. It was a book about the early settlers of the area, the history of the land, and the people who had called it home. I opened the book to the first page and began to read. As I turned the pages, I came across a disturbing tale. It was buried deep within the text, almost as if it had been hidden on purpose. The story was about a group of settlers who had come to the area in the 1700s, drawn to the land by promises of untold power. This group, known as the Black Circle, was a secretive cult that believed in harnessing the power of the land and its spirits. They were said to have practiced dark rituals, summoning forces from beyond the grave, believing that by offering blood sacrifices, they could gain unimaginable strength. They believed that the land was alive, that the mountain itself was a living entity, and that by appeasing it with sacrifices, they could unlock its power. At first, the rituals seemed to work. The members of the Black Circle became more influential in the area, gaining wealth, power, and respect. But as time went on, things began to change. The land, which had seemed so receptive at first, began to grow restless. The rituals became darker, more violent. The sacrifices grew in number, and the group's grip on the town tightened. But no matter how much blood was offered, it was never enough. The land seemed to hunger for more, and the people of the Black Circle began to realize too late that they had made a terrible mistake. They had awakened something ancient and angry, something that was not to be tampered with. Then, one night, everything went wrong. The Black Circle attempted one final ritual, a ceremony meant to grant them ultimate power. They gathered at the peak of the mountain, preparing to offer the greatest sacrifice of all. The book didn't go into detail about what happened during the ritual, but the outcome was clear. The land didn't bless them. It cursed them. The members of the Black Circle were found the next morning, torn apart. Their bodies were scattered across the peak, mutilated beyond recognition. The once powerful group was no more. The land had exacted its toll, and it had taken everything from them. The mountain was silent once more, but the curse remained. The book went on to explain that since that night, anyone who dared to tamper with the mountain, who ventured too close to its peak, or tried to uncover the secrets of the Black Circle, was said to suffer a gruesome fate. The curse was real, and it had claimed the lives of many who had come after the cult. Some had disappeared without a trace, while others had returned, broken and mad, their minds shattered by what they had seen or experienced on the mountain. The book didn't say exactly what the curse was, but it was clear that Devil's Peak was not a place to be trifled with. As I read, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The stories Mark had told us now made sense. The disappearances, the strange figures in the woods, the nightmares. It was all connected. Devil's Peak wasn't just a place haunted by ghost stories. It was a place cursed by something far darker, something that had been awakened long ago and was still waiting for the next fool to come along and try to challenge it. I closed the book with a shaky hand, my mind racing. I had to know more. What exactly had happened to the Black Circle? What had they uncovered in their dark rituals? And more importantly, why was the curse still active? The town had been abandoned, but the mountain remained, and the curse seemed to linger, pulling anyone who dared to get too close into its deadly grip. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was now part of this story, that my curiosity had led me into something I wasn't prepared for. But there was no turning back now. The nightmare wasn't just in my dreams anymore. It was real. And I had to find out the truth about Devil's Peak, no matter what the cost. As I left the library, the sky had already begun to darken. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves outside, and the cold seemed to bite at my skin. The town around me felt like a ghost town, empty and abandoned, as though it too was cursed by the mountain. I couldn't help but wonder if the people who had once lived here had known about the rituals, had known about the curse, and had left before it was too late. But I also wondered, what would happen if I ignored the warnings? What if I ventured up to the peak myself? What if the curse would claim me next? The answers were just out of reach, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to stop until I found them. One weekend, I found myself heading back to Devil's Peak. I couldn't say exactly why I was going. Maybe I thought I could find the answers that had been gnawing at me, like pieces of a puzzle that wouldn't fit no matter how much I twisted them. Maybe it was the need to understand what had happened. Or maybe I was just searching for something I couldn't explain, something that had been haunting me ever since that first night in the woods. The dreams, the feeling that something was following me. The unshakable sensation at Devil's Peak had marked me in some way I couldn't yet understand. I drove alone this time, not telling anyone where I was going. I wasn't sure if I was trying to be brave or if I just didn't want anyone to know how afraid I really was. The drive was the same as before, winding roads that twisted and turned through the dense forest. The trees were thick, towering overhead, their branches casting shadows that seemed to stretch and crawl like living things. The sky was overcast, a dull gray, and the air had a strange heaviness to it, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. When I reached the foot of Devil's Peak, the town was as empty and silent as ever. It was like a forgotten place, abandoned long ago by the people who had lived here. The buildings were falling apart, windows shattered, doors hanging off their hinges. It was unsettling to see it all again, but I pushed the unease down, telling myself that I had come for answers, not to be afraid. I parked my car and looked up at the mountain. The peak was shrouded in mist, barely visible against the gray sky. The trees at the base of the mountain were dense, their branches swaying slightly in the breeze. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the mountain, wondering if I was making a mistake. Something deep inside me screamed to turn back, but I didn't listen. I'd come this far, and I had to finish it. I started up the trail, the same one I had hiked before. The woods around me were eerily silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you, making you feel like you're being watched. The deeper I went, the colder it became. The air seemed to grow thicker, heavier, until it felt like I was walking through a thick fog. There were no sounds of animals, no rustling of leaves or chirping of birds, just the crunch of my boots against the dry, brittle leaves on the ground. The further I hiked, the more the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I kept walking, my steps quickening as the path grew steeper. The trees around me seemed to close in, the shadows growing longer and darker. And then I saw it. Blood. It was splattered across the rocks near the edge of the path, fresh and glistening in the dim light. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't like anything I had seen before. It was too much, too vivid, like a warning. The blood was fresh, not just a stain or something that had been there for a while. It was still wet, still dripping, like someone or something had been here moments before. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath caught in my throat. The sight of it made my stomach twist. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it an animal? Or worse, was it something that had happened to someone else who had dared to venture up here? I could feel my pulse quicken, a surge of panic flooding my chest. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to turn around and run, but something held me in place. My eyes darted around, searching for any signs of what had happened. Anything that would explain the blood. But I saw nothing. It was just the blood, splattered on the rocks, and nothing else. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath shallow. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, and unmistakable. The sound of boots crunching on the ground behind me. My blood ran cold. I turned around, my heart racing, but there was no one there. No one at all. I stood frozen for a moment, my eyes scanning the dark woods behind me. The footsteps had stopped, but the eerie silence that followed was worse than anything I had ever felt. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I took a step forward, my legs shaking beneath me, and then I felt it. Something cold, something brushing against my skin. It wasn't a gust of wind. It wasn't the branches moving. It was like fingers, cold and light, brushing the back of my neck. I froze. My heart skipped a beat as the cold sensation spread down my spine. I didn't dare turn around. The feeling of being watched, the feeling of something close, too close, was overwhelming. I could feel it, like something was right there, just out of sight, its eyes on me. Without thinking, I spun around and ran. My feet pounded against the dirt path, my breath coming in short gasps, my heart thundering in my chest. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran, pushing myself harder, faster, not caring about anything except getting away from whatever was following me. I ran until I reached the car, the cold night air stinging my lungs, my muscles burning from the effort. I didn't stop when I got to the parking lot. I didn't even glance back at the mountain. I jumped into the car, slammed the door shut, and started the engine with trembling hands. I drove away as fast as I could, my mind reeling from what had just happened. The blood, the footsteps, the cold fingers brushing against my skin. It all felt like a nightmare. But it was real. It had happened. And whatever it was still out there, watching me. I didn't go back to Devil's Peak after that night. I couldn't. The fear was too much, and the memories were too vivid. But the nightmares didn't stop. Every night, I saw the same thing. A figure standing in the woods, its body covered in blood, its eyes hollow and empty, reaching out to me. And every time, it came closer. I couldn't escape it. The figure, the blood, the cold sensation that I was being followed, it all came back to me, every night, each time more real than before. I don't know what it is that haunts me, but I know this. Whatever it is, it's still out there, waiting. And it's not finished with me yet. It's been months now since that night at Devil's Peak, but the images, the feelings, they haven't left me. I don't know what happened up there, and I don't think I ever will every time I close my eyes. I can still feel it, the coldness, the presence, that hand reaching out to touch me, to pull me into whatever dark world it belongs to. The nightmares have become more frequent, the details clearer, more vivid. Some nights, it feels like I'm back there again, hiking those cursed trails, hearing the footsteps behind me, feeling that unshakable chill creeping down my spine. I can't explain it. I've tried. I've told myself it was all just a bad dream, that I was caught in some feverish imagination. But deep down, I know it wasn't. The land at Devil's Peak, there's something about it. Something that traps you. Something that follows you long after you leave. It's not just a place. It's not just a mountain. It's a curse. I've come to realize that now more than ever. And I know the legends were right. It's not something to take lightly. It's not something you can walk away from once you've stepped foot on that land. Because once you're marked by it, you're never truly free. Every day since that night, I've tried to go on with my life. I've tried to focus on work, to spend time with friends, to move past what happened. But I can't. It's like the memory of Devil's Peak is branded on me. A scar that refuses to fade. A shadow that never lifts. And no matter how hard I try, no matter how much I tell myself I'm okay, I know I'm not. Something changed inside me the night I went up that mountain. Something I can't escape. It was only a few weeks ago when I decided I had to go back. Go back to the place where it all started. I thought maybe facing it head-on would help me put it behind me. I thought if I could go back, walk the same path, maybe I could make sense of everything. But as soon as I got close, as soon as I saw the familiar, twisted trees and the dark shadows creeping up the mountain's base, something inside me snapped. I couldn't do it. The memories rushed back, overwhelming and suffocating. I felt the presence again. That cold feeling, like something was lurking just out of sight, watching me, waiting for me to step further into its grasp. I don't know what it is about that place, but it has a power over you, a pull. It lures you in, makes you believe you can leave, makes you think it's over. But it's not. That mountain, it's not something you can escape from. It's not just a place. It's a warning, a final warning for anyone who dares to venture too close. I spoke to Mark again after that. We met at the same diner where we had all gathered before. The place that always seemed to have a stale, unnerving atmosphere. Mark was sitting at a corner booth, his face tired, like he hadn't been sleeping. He looked different now, more worn, like the weight of everything that had happened was taking a toll on him. "How are you doing?" he asked when I sat down, his eyes scanning mine like he was looking for something, trying to gauge if I had made it through okay. "I don't know," I said, rubbing my temples. "It's like I can't shake it. That place, it's still with me, Mark. I don't know why I went back, but I couldn't. I don't know how to explain it, but the moment I got close to the mountain, I felt it again. That presence." Mark's face grew darker, his lips tightening. He leaned forward, across the table, his voice dropping to a whisper. You should have listened. You should have left it alone. Once you've been there, it doesn't let you go. It waits for you to come back. And when you do, it has you. I shook my head, trying to grasp what he was saying. But why? Why is it like this? What is it? Mark took a deep breath, running his hand through his hair. I don't know exactly what it is, but I've heard enough to understand that Devil's Peak is cursed. It's not just the land, it's something deeper. Something that was awakened a long time ago. The Black Circle. They didn't just make a mistake by trying to summon power. They awakened something. Something that was always there, buried beneath the mountain, waiting for the right moment. I stared at Mark, my mind racing with what he was saying. So, it's still there. It's still waiting. Mark nodded slowly. Yes, and it's not just watching anymore. It's waiting for anyone foolish enough to come back. It feeds on fear, on curiosity, on the souls of those who think they can outsmart it. You were lucky to leave when you did. But the next time, it might be you who never comes back. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me as his words sank in. What do you mean by never come back? Mark didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with an expression I couldn't place. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Up there, looking for answers, looking for something to explain the unexplainable. They go looking for something to make sense of the horrors they've seen, and it gets inside their head. It doesn't matter if they find what they're looking for. Once they're on that mountain, they belong to it. The land takes them. It doesn't let them leave. I sat there, frozen, as the weight of his words settled in. I couldn't deny it. What Mark was saying made sense. The fear, the coldness, the sense of being watched. It had all felt real. And now I understood why. Devil's Peak wasn't just a place where something dark had happened. It was a place that trapped you. It was a curse, one that lingers long after you leave. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't over. The nightmare wasn't over. I might have walked away from the mountain, but the mountain wasn't done with me. It had marked me, just like it had marked everyone before me. And I didn't know if I would ever be free of it. I left the diner that night feeling heavier than when I walked in. The air outside had grown colder, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of Mark's warning pressing down on me. What was I supposed to do now? How could I ever be sure I was safe? How could I escape something that had burrowed itself so deep into my mind, into my very soul? The nightmares didn't stop. If anything, they grew worse. Every night, the same blood-stained figure would appear, growing closer, reaching for me with those twisted hands. The fear had become a part of me now, woven into the fabric of my dreams. of my waking moments. It was always there, just beyond my reach, waiting for me to slip up. I wish I could say I found peace, that I've moved on, but I haven't. Devil's Peak isn't just a place. It's a curse, and I can feel it every time I close my eyes. It's waiting. And one day, when I least expect it, it might be me who never comes back. So if you ever find yourself in Virginia, if you ever hear about Devil's Peak, don't go. It's not just a mountain. It's not just a legend. It's a warning. And if you ignore it, if you step foot on that cursed land, you might find out the hard way just how true the stories really are. Because the next time, it might be you who never comes back. The end. The end.